beloved ones. So I have been doing some phone photography videos. I did one a few days ago and I wanted to keep going with those. And part of the reason is because we don't always have good cameras with us. I have an SLR camera and I have to say it does take way better pictures than a phone does. But if you know how to use your phone and you know how to compose a good photo, you can at least get something that's good enough to share on Instagram and to share the beauty that you're seeing. Because I think one of the reasons, for me at least, that I take pictures is because I see something wonderful and I want other people to see it too. And so I feel like in some ways I'm just an admirer in the art gallery that is the creation of God. Every beautiful flower, every sunset, I just admire this work that the Creator made. And I not only feel like I'm someone in an art gallery, but I'm also someone who knows the artist. And so for me, photography is such a source of joy for that reason, because it tells me who God is. And so it's a way to really proclaim the gospel, to proclaim the love of God, the abundance of his creation, and the fact that he didn't have to make all this beauty for us, but yet he did. And that not only did he make beauty, but he sent Jesus to die for us, because his love is a love that is abundant and generous in pursuing. We'll go to great lengths to have our hearts and to show us that he loves us. So I wanted to show you a few pictures I took today, just wandering around Albertsons for like 10 or 15 minutes with my phone. And I have to say that my phone is nothing super fancy. It's just an iPhone 6S, so it's 12 megapixels. And I learned something kind of fun actually today. Let me pull up my photos. So I accidentally hit the I button for info on this, and I'll show you on my iPad. So here's one of the photos I took. And if you go over here on the right, it'll be obvious, the opposite maybe for you, but anyway, next to the trash can, there's a little eye. If you click that, it actually tells you what camera on your phone took it, how many millimeters the focus was, and what the aperture was, what the megapixels were, the dimensions of the photo, the size, and the shutter speed. So what's interesting about that is that this particular photo was taken at 1/30th of a second. And that's actually pretty challenging to hold steady with a regular camera. And so a lot of these pictures, as I was looking at them, I found that they were shooting at between 1/30th and a 15th of a second. And so I had a few come out blurry because I didn't give it time to focus before I took the shot. So that's tip number one when you're taking indoor macro photography, especially, is to make sure that you give the camera a second to focus. That little box will appear, it'll focus, then you take it before you move it and you'll get a clearer shot. The other thing I was having to do sometimes actually to brace my arms like this, hold them into my body and brace them so that I could keep it steady for that long. Because in regular photography, a 60th of a second is about the slowest they say you can handhold. Now, one of the tricks I've learned for shooting slower than that with an SLR is actually to shoot on burst. And you can do that with a phone too. You can just hold down that shutter button, that center button, for more than a second. It'll take multiples. If you're in a really challenging low light situation, you might get a good shot if you shoot like 5 in a row. So that's another little tip I learned from very regular photography that carried over to phone photography. So the other thing I mentioned in my previous video is that you can actually tap on the screen to focus. So you can choose your focus spot and then it's going to actually pick that. So if you're shooting a row of roses and you want just the front one more sharp, then you tap on the screen to focus on that. And again, give it a second to focus before you move the phone, because if you wait, if you do it too quickly, you might actually blur your picture. So that's something to remember. And what those settings that are on there mean is that 2.2 is a very specific aperture. It's pretty wide open, kind of like your pupils when there isn't much light in the room. And so that means that you really do want to choose your focus carefully in situations like that. You want to actually say, all right, I want this flower in focus, this part of the flower, because you might, if there are layers of distances in the flower, you might get the outer petals and not the center in focus if you're not actually actively choosing where you're focusing. So I actually have one like that I really like the way it turned out. There were some tulips, and I don't know if you've shot the center of a tulip before, but they're actually really lovely. They look super cool. So this shot is one where I chose the focus of the center right here. And so you really want to choose carefully where you focus, because if I had focused on the outer petals, this really, really cool center would actually be blurry. And you want to think about the focal point of your picture. What is it about this thing that you're photographing that is drawing your attention and making you really excited about how beautiful it is? Because if you don't consider what your focal point is, then you might not actually focus in the right spot, and you might also have too much background stuff. So shooting in a grocery store is actually uniquely challenging. So it was really good for me to actually think about some of these things as I was shooting today. So the other thing to consider is what's your background, because you don't want to shoot with a ton of chaos in the background. So there was this one orchid that was especially difficult to shoot. And so you can kind of see that I don't know that I ever really got a successful shot of it, because you can see all the store in the background. Even though that aperture blurred it, it just never really turned out the way I wanted it to. Now this one is a little dark, but I kind of like it. And so what I might do actually is hit the edit tab and go in, and I might lighten up the shadows. That's something else I wanted to mention, is the post editing, especially on an iPhone. I'm not sure about the other brands. I think with a blue phone, which is the one that I shoot my videos on, that has that option. So I'm guessing most brands will have an edit tab, and there are some things you can do there. So I actually wanted to mention those briefly, because those will really help your photos if you don't get it exposed right the first time. So with that photo, for example, what I would probably do is go in and adjust not the overall exposure, which is usually the first thing, but I would go in and I would adjust just the shadows, and I would go down on the highlights. So if you have a shot like that that's backlit, one thing you can do, like I said, is to increase the shadows, decrease the highlights. And the other thing I use a lot, especially if I convert the picture to black and white, is the contrast slider. So you can play with these and see how you like the photo. And honestly, if you do this yourself, if you use the contrast, the exposure, the shadows and the highlights, and you play with those sliders, you're going to get a way better picture than all those random filters on Instagram, because you're actually choosing everything that you want. Now, it doesn't mean those filters won't make a photo interesting. Sometimes they do, but you can actually create your own filters custom for each photo by actually editing them. So another thing I sometimes use is there are a couple for tint and for temperature. And so, for example, some of those photos look a little green. And so because of the fluorescent lighting in Albertsons, I could take that slider and I could change the color temperature, make it warmer, and I could take the tint and add more magenta and go from green to magenta there. So temperature sliders typically go colder temperature blue, warmer temperature red. So they're going to add blue if you go colder, and they're going to add red if you go warmer. And the tint slider is going to add either more green on one side or magenta on the other. So those are some good things to know. Those are edits that you can use in Lightroom as well. So it's pretty cool that your phone typically has these things on it that you can play with on your own. So it's great to have those kinds of skills. And I feel like this is something that goes hand in hand with phone photography. There is usually a saturation slider that is how you make it black and white. If you slide all the way down and desaturate it, it'll go black and white. And usually, unless the photo has tons of contrast, you're going to want to use that contrast slider too. So that's a lot of the stuff I really noticed today. You really want to think about your composition, what's in the background, and how much you're including in the picture, that you're really thinking about what you want to take, and keeping that camera steady, and really focusing on the things that are drawing your attention, that are really unique, and making sure that you focus on those things. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought and really gives you some tips on how to take great phone pictures. And I will be back with more. I'm hoping to talk about lighting a little bit as well. And I might do a Q&A session as well if you put some questions on the comments. So let me know what your questions are, especially about macro and flower photography. It's pretty amazing that our phones can focus this close up and that they can deal with some low light situations. So please hit me with your questions. I would love to know what you'd like to learn, whether it's macro or flower photography like this video, or general questions. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Have a great rest of your day, and much love to you all. Bye.